The economic turmoil of the early 20th century, with the Great Depression and the phenomena of hyperinflation and mass unemployment, led to a questioning of the foundations of the Western economic order. Communist parties across Europe grew in support. The American liberal solution was the New Deal, Keynesian economics, which advocated for a stronger role for the government in maintaining economic stability, especially through economic stimulus through capital spending during economic downturns, became the dominant approach to the economic question in the West. In Central Europe, the answer was fascism, which recognized the instability of putting the economic destiny of a nation in the hands of an increasingly volatile international financial system, and instead put economic decisions and the control of the monetary supply in the hands of a strong nationalist leader, ending the reliance on both the unstable gold standard and the exploitative international bankers who plundered sovereign nations through interest rates. The first of these was the only survivor of World War II, and the victorious countries experienced an unprecedented level of growth and affluence in the post-war years. However, by the 1960s and 70s, cracks had started to appear on the surface. Keynesianism no longer seemed to hold all the answers as Western capitalism again showed signs of faltering. At the same time, an immense social revolution was going on in the United States, while a swell of anti-capitalist sentiment erupted in the protests of 1968. The baby boomers of the post-war period, the first generation raised on television with a conception of injustices on a global scale, were for the first time having their say, and seemed to be in open revolt against every status quo left by their parents. The protests of 1968 came at a time of great change in the academic left. Traditional Marxist doctrines were being questioned and outright abandoned. Continental academics retained their leftist radicalism, but discarded the Marxist dogma which they felt was a clutch on the revolution. Marx's dialectical materialism had predicted that the internal contradictions of the logic of capitalism would eventually lead to a revolution of the proletariat. But Marx was operating under a number of Enlightenment and specifically Hegelian assumptions. Now, with the wave of postmodernism and post-structuralism sweeping the academy, modernist ideas like progress, historicism, economic determinism, and rigid class structures were rendered obsolete by the New Left. Another trend in the development of the New Left was the effort of a number of Jewish theorists to integrate psychoanalysis into the left's radical interpretation of social phenomena. Freud's tendency to boil all psychological phenomena down to some sort of sexual repression was given a political aspect by Wilhelm Reich. The mass psychology of fascism attempted to explain why the German workers chose reaction over sexual progress of the sort Reich was promoting. Reich postulated a theory whereby sexual repression led to totalitarianism. Reich's solution was thus to expose children to sex and masturbation at a young age. Sexual liberation would be the counter to fascism. In the United States, too, Frankfurt School theorist Herbert Marcuse also wrote of the need to liberate individuals from the sexual repression imposed on them by society. Marcuse challenges the view of Freud that civilization is based on the permanent subjugation of the human instincts. Instead, in his work Eros and Civilization, Marcuse attempts to interpret history through biology, history seen not as a class struggle, but a fight against the repression of our instincts. He argues that advanced industrial society is preventing us from reaching a non-repressive society based on a fundamental different experience of being, a fundamentally different relation between man and nature. Marcuse's aim, then, is to turn radical politics into not a struggle for better working conditions or to combat capitalist exploitation, but instead a struggle to liberate the individual's most base natural instincts, to liberate the libido from the constraints imposed on it by culture, tradition, or reason. Marcuse's fellow Frankfurt School member Theodor Adorno placed the blame of the growth of fascism with sexual repression. Adorno identified a number of warning signs of the potential for the outbreak of the authoritarian personality, one of which was exaggerated concerns over sex. Adorno also placed the blame of the tendency for authoritarianism with the structure of the traditional family. Inspired by Freudian psychoanalysis, the book suggested that authoritarianism was rooted in suppressed homosexuality, which was redirected into outward hostility towards the father, which was, in turn, suppressed for fear of being infantilized and castrated by the father. The influence of the Frankfurt School, especially Marcuse, on the New Left is difficult to understate. At the University of Rome, in the '68 protests, students brandished placards proclaiming their allegiance to Marx, Mao and Marcuse. Before the '60s had ended, he was commonly designated as the unofficial faculty advisor to the New Left. Marcuse's impact went well beyond the precincts of radical politics. In 1969, Pope Paul VI condemned him by name, blaming Marcuse, along with Sigmund Freud, for promoting the disgusting and unbridled manifestations of eroticism and the animal, barbarous and subhuman degradations commonly known as the sexual revolution. The hostility that Marcuse aroused was ideologically ecumenical. In Pravda, Soviet journalist Yuri Zhukov denounced him as a false prophet, while the apartheid regime in South Africa blocked the importation of all of his books. Only in the liberal United States was Marcuse celebrated as an intellectual par excellence. The influence of Marcuse, the Frankfurt School and other radicals of the New Left was felt in the form the 1968 protests took. In Foucault and the post-structuralists, we see the most extreme expression of cultural relativism read through structures of power, in which shared humanity and individuality are almost entirely absent. Instead, people are constructed by their position in relation to dominant cultural ideas, either as oppressors or oppressed. This recipe then, sexual liberation, the destruction of all traditional orders as repressive power structures, skepticism to structuralist interpretations of social phenomena, and the analysis of all those phenomena through the lens of power relations and absolute relativism would be the recipe for the New Left. But what effectively happened in the aftermath of '68 was not the downfall of capitalist power relations, but the rise of a new figure of the spirit of capitalism. In the words of Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek, the system abandoned the Fordist centralized structure of the production process and developed a network-based form of organization founded on employee initiative and autonomy in the workplace. Thus, instead of a hierarchical centralized chains of command, we now have networks with a multitude of participants, organizing work in the form of teams or projects, which are intent on customer satisfaction and a general mobilization of workers thanks to their leaders' vision. This new spirit of capitalism triumphantly recuperated the egalitarian and anti-hierarchical rhetoric of 1968, presenting itself as a successful libertarian revolt against the oppressive social organizations of corporate capitalism and really existing socialism. The 1968 protest focused its struggle against what were perceived as the three pillars of capitalism: factory, school and family. As a result, each domain was submitted to post-industrial transformation, leading to factory work becoming more and more outsourced or, in the developed world, reorganized along the post-Fordist non-hierarchical interactive teamwork. Meanwhile, permanent, flexible, privatized education is more and more replacing universal public education, and multiple forms of flexible sexual arrangements are replacing the traditional family. At the same time, the left lost in its very victory. The direct enemy was defeated, but replaced by a new form of even more direct capitalist domination. In postmodern capitalism, the market is invading new spheres which were hitherto considered the privileged domain of the state, from education to prisons and security. Half a century later, capitalism thrives. The social revolution brought about by the New Left has in fact aided in making capitalism more international, less constrained by social pressures, and more flexible and capable of challenge than ever before. The sexual liberation of the left has meant declining birth rates and the complete integration of Western women into the capitalist structure for exploitation. The rejection of the structural nature of classical leftism has meant an end to worker solidarity and agitation for the working class, and facilitated the replacement of the industrial labour jobs with a mass of easily replaceable work in the service and managerial sector. The advocacy for anti-racism and deconstruction of nationalism has led to an opening of borders and the increasing availability of cheap labour for capitalists to undercut their native workers. The social radicalism of the New Left has been accepted and integrated into the capitalist system. A deal with the devil was made. The left was given its liberation, its destruction of tradition and its sexualized culture. The capitalists gained a mass of easily pacified consumers without loyalty to their kin or any belief system which is fundamentally at odds with the ruling logic of capitalism. The universalism of the left has facilitated the globalist corporatism of late capitalism. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels assert that the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbances of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. Through the useful idiots and cynical opportunists of the New Left, the capitalists found another way to revolutionize production and expand into uncharted territory, hitherto blocked off by traditional concerns of morality or national interest. The result has been a tremendous transfer of wealth from ordinary Europeans to an increasingly small number of international capitalists, and the complete apathy of a mass of citizens, now mere consumers, who have been reduced to a bovine kind of existence, with the constant provision of cheap consumer goods, necessary material comfort, and an ever-increasingly sexualized culture, all sold to them in the name of liberation.